All right. So I just wanted to do a little video here since some students have asked in terms of, exactly what it constitutes a cult versus religion, etc. And so I wanted to do a little bit of a video to explain some of these things. And so just to start off with, to make a little bit of a note here, in terms of religion in a more general way, you have on the one hand, you have ethnic kind of based religions, where many traditions are tied strictly to ethnicity, where people are automatically born into a particular religious tradition. Generally, there's something that are quite regionally based, that they've kind of grown organically in a certain area. And it would involve, for many of them, for example, just honoring your dead ancestors, certain kind of rituals around death or marriage. It's just things that you're really born into, and it's hard to separate the religion from the culture. Okay. And generally, there's a sense of your identity as being tied to that ethnicity, and with that is a close connection to a particular religious tradition. A classic example here would be, of course, Judaism. Is very much an ethnic-based religion tied in with the Jewish people and sense of Jewish identity, because the whole history of that religion is tied to their identity as Jewish people, right? So anyways, here you often then find an emphasis on rites of passage, as a part of initiation into that religion, and as well your sense of identity in that ethnic group. And one's identity is very much then cemented by various religious obligations. This is sort of what generally characterizes it. And to convert into this religion is actually more of sort of being adopted into the family, is more of a relational connection and relational commitment than it is, a commitment to a set of beliefs. Okay. Then you have voluntary religions, and this is sort of the norm of a lot of the major world religions, where religion here is a matter of choice and conviction, requiring some form of conversion and commitment. And of course, these religions seek converts, whereas ethnic-based religions do not seek converts. You need to basically be born into them. Whereas here, like Buddhism, Christianity, and many traditions, they seek converts. And so there's a sense here that what distinguishes this religion is its distinct religious message, that they are conveyors of truth for humanity in a certain way, and invite people to commit to this vision of reality, this vision of truth that they have. Okay. And as I say here, can usually relate the history of that religion and how it spread to others. You can look at the historical development of this religion, how it sort of began and spread, often through spreading through territory, conquest, conversion, going into other regions and countries. And then people of diverse ethnic groups and backgrounds, diverse cultures, can become a part of that religious tradition. However, given enough time, these religions can also become rather ethnically based religions, in that if they really dominate in a certain region, right, then people that are born in that region automatically identify with that religion. Okay, so they then kind of create their own religious identity that then gets passed on to future generations. And this religion then is passed on more through cultural transmission. So people, again, here end up being born into it. And this is pretty much very much the norm, say, for example, in a lot of Muslim countries where there isn't much freedom of religion. And so many people automatically tend to be born into that religion because, again, the one religion is very dominant and there isn't that much choice. Okay, so that in one sense, it was a religion of conversion and commitment, but because of its domination in certain regions and countries, right, it then has become something that is more tied into ethnicity and you're born into. The same thing with Sikhism. If you're born into a certain region, you tend to automatically be sort of born into that religious tradition. So you'll have this sort of thing going on. So just to highlight just a little bit in terms of how religions evolve, they always tend to, in terms of the classic world religions, generally speaking, they begin often with a figure, a certain charismatic leader who is the founder of a religion. That's very, very common. Is there's a founder, there's a figure, there's a Jesus, a Buddha, a Muhammad, a Guru Nanak, a Lao Tzu, Trunks, certain figures that become leaders, and these leaders tend to be set apart. There's something very special about them, certain kind of qualities, abilities that they have, and the key thing is they are somehow more enlightened beings. They have a special spiritual connection, and this is what sets them apart. This is the basis of their charisma. Okay, that kind of like an energetic attraction of their connection to higher realities in some way. And so they start gathering and attracting around themselves followers, disciples. And these disciples give them authority often. They look up to them as the enlightened master. Right. And other times, though, they can be demanding of authority, that it's somewhat coercive. And they say here, you might say the figure of Muhammad, it tended to be a bit that way when he especially went to Medina and came into a position of power. So you have this sort of thing where they are leaders either by example or by command. And you get here then the birthing of a new religious movement. And in another class where I talked about the nature of religion, I had set up this bit of a model here in terms of the different components of a religion. And so, every religion, like I said in that other video, is that you've got the outer sphere of religion, which is religion as an institution, as an organization. It's sort of more the objective component. Okay, that's the outer sphere. And it's basically made up of the three key things of their beliefs. Right? The various beliefs and doctrines, their stories, their myths, their traditions that then get collected and put into Holy Scriptures. And that becomes the basis of the beliefs and the ideas in that religion. Then you have the practices, the rituals, the rules, the laws, how people then live that religion, what they can do and what they can't do is the second, the practical component. And then the third is the organizational, social, institutional component. That as a religion, they start to build holy places. They have buildings, they get organized, they have leaders that then conduct, services and whatnot, okay? So those are sort of the three spheres that make out the outer sphere of religion. Then, however, at the heart of it is the inner sphere of spiritual experience, where the believer, the subject, the individual, experientially is engaged in the religious institution. And that the religion then nurtures their sense of spirituality, their sense of spiritual experience, right? And so it's in that arena here of spirituality, the experiential. Herein is where new religions get born. An individual who goes on a deeper spiritual, experiential type of quest, seeking this higher reality, seeking the truth, seeking God, has some kind of profound experience. They become enlightened. They get revelations. Well, they then often become the founders of a new religion, okay? And so this is how things kick off. This is how then the Buddha breaks away from Hinduism. Jesus sort of comes into conflict with the Jewish religious establishment, for example, right? And as there's more and more tension between the pre-existing religious traditions, and this figure kind of challenges some of the ideas in various ways, they then break away to gain new followers that join them to give birth to a new religion. This is sort of what happens. And then what happens is it starts to get organized, and it creates its own kind of institutional structure in terms of its beliefs, its practices, how it gets organized, and its own leaders, right? And this is sort of how a new religion gets born. So you have new religions being born out of older religions or older religious beliefs and traditions in various ways. So it's very dynamic, okay? Very dynamic. And so then what happens is that you'll have the founder kind of breaking away, and that automatically leads then to a bit of a crisis. Gee, what do we do now? Who are we going to follow? What are we going to do? And this is where then it's a critical time in that religion to get very well organized and establish their leadership, establish clear boundaries of their sense of identity, that this is what we believe, this is how we're different from this religion or that religion. You know, they kind of establish those sorts of boundaries. and define themselves as a separate and new religion. Okay, you'll see this very clearly, say, for example, in Sikhism, that after the death of Guru Nanak, shortly thereafter, they start to develop their own rituals that are no longer just Hindu rituals. And a sense of identity is now being separate and different from either Hinduism or Islam, but that it's its own religious tradition. So this is sort of what happens. Okay, and here, to use the language that's used in sociology, things become routinized in the sense of how it gets institutionalized. All right, the routinization or institutionalization of a religion, and that then gets established, and then that is what gets passed down in the following generations to become then a newly established new religion. Okay, that is solid on its own terms and has its own sense of separate identity. And so, and I'm using here some of the language and terminology. Max Weber was a very important sociologist of religion who popularized this idea of religion involving the two elements of charisma followed by routinization, how the religion gets institutionalized after that initial charisma of the founder, that has sort of that juice of that religion, that vision, that fresh vision of spiritual enlightenment, fresh revelations. It's sort of that juiciness, right, that sparks a new religion. And then it gets, more and more institutionalized. And sometimes it can lose its juiciness, so to speak. It can lose its charisma, right? And then there'll be those who are seeking to reconnect in a fresh new way to that spiritual juice, is what I'd like to call it, but it is basically charisma. And that's then where it's like, okay, what's going to happen? As individuals do that, is that going to bring about a deeper renewal, a revival of that religion? Or are they going to start challenging the old religion in certain ways that it gets kicked out to become a new religion? Okay, so you'll find then that a lot of religious sects, and we'll be going into this a bit more, but various religious sects start developing here, where there will be those who will say that the established religion is no longer faithful to the vision of the founder, that they've lost their roots, they've become corrupt, they need to somehow be renewed and get back on track in some way, all right? And so they become movements of reform, renewal, and can often give birth to sects within that religion. And then other groups, they may be so radical, so challenging the old religion and teaching so many new and different ideas, they get kicked out as a heretical cult. Okay, this is where we start getting that sense of the separation of sect and cult. Excuse me. So this is sort of a dynamic that goes on here, and I'll kind of explain that a bit more. So what's happened is again, in academia, Ernest Troeltsch here, quite some time ago, he's the one that sort of put together what's been known as the church, sect, cult typology. And this is basically, more of an abstraction that's useful to kind of categorize different types of religious groups. And so the first main type here in this typology is using the term church, because again, he was just largely referring to Christianity in the West, but in a sociological sense, it can be applied to any religion. The term church referred to and was a term that was used to represent the mainstream religion. Okay, that in terms of its sociological structure, how it operates, is very well established in this society and is fully supported by mainstream society. It is sort of the conventional religion. It is the norm in that society. And because it's the norm, it's a conventional religion, say Hinduism in India, Christianity in the West, used to be, we're becoming more and more secular, Islam in Arabia, for example, whatever, it's sort of the main religion. So there's very little tension between the religion and society that it exists in. Okay, that society and that religion, they mutually reinforce each other. So the political system will support it, the education system, the legal system, right? They all will support the religion, and vice versa. The religion will support the political situation, the legal system, etc. So you get this nice wedding, this marriage, right, between religion and society. And that's kind of what's represented by church, so to speak. It's that mainstream religion. And so it tends to be world affirming is another term that sociologists bring in here, in the sense that it affirms society as it is, that society is good, and it is sort of the ideal Muslim society, ideal Christian society, ideal Hindu society, whatever it is, okay, or Buddhist society. And so there's a well integration between religion and society, and therefore it's often referred to as world affirming. There's no tension here, right? Whatever, okay? So that's church. Then you have sect. And a sect represents a social group that challenges the mainstream religion in some way, i.e. the church, so to speak, and exists with some tension between it and society, between it and that established religion. Why? Because it's usually calling for a more radical commitment. All right. It's seeking some sense of reform of that religion or renewal of that religion, a purification of that religion, believing that there's been just too much of a compromise with society, that things that have somehow deteriorated, become corrupt over time. There's been a decay within the religious tradition, that there's no longer commitment to the vision of the founder. It's lost its purity. And so here you may get movements of getting back to the Quran, back to the Bible, back to the Vedas, whatever the tradition is. It's a call to reform, renew, and go back to the origins of that religion, to revitalize it that way. And so as a result, more is demanded from the followers, from those who belong to a particular sect. They're expected to be more committed, to follow that religion more seriously. All right. They tend to, in that sense, be more exclusivistic in attitude, that their way is the better way, the truer way, the purer way than others. Okay, that they'll see sort of somehow corrupt, right? And so in this regard, they then tend to be a bit more world denying. They are in tension with society, saying that we need to leave things of this world. The society or aspect, especially say today, that modernity is an enemy of the religion. This is it's most strongly seen today, mostly in the Muslim world. It has been with Christianity, but depending on certain groups, it's still there, but it's sort of toned down some. But where it's held that the West and secular society is the enemy of religion. All right. And it needs to be renounced. We need to have nothing to do with the ways of this world. It is all corrupt, right? That's sort of what's meant by kind of world denying and renouncing it. And so in this regard, sects tend to be schismatic. They tend to kind of break away from the main religion. However, but they still are able to remain within that religion. All right. And some are more extreme, some are more moderate. You'll have quite a spectrum of extremity here. Okay. But the key thing is that a sect still would be categorized as being within that religion of Christianity or Islam or Hinduism or whatever it is. Okay. They're still within it. Okay. And however, if they're too radical, they get kicked out. Okay. And sometimes a sect can be the birthing of not really a new religion, but a very powerful and strong component within that religion. And so here, a classic example would be Protestantism. In Christianity, you had the Catholic Church that was sort of existed before that. And then the Protestant Reformation is a sect that sought to reform the church and then became very, very strong and dominant. That is almost, equal in terms of impact as the Catholic churches, for example, right? So you'll kind of have that sort of thing going on. And that happens in Buddhism. You'll have, the early Buddhism, Theravada sect of Buddhism, that's part of the Hinayana tradition, and then various Mahayana schools and sects that break away, like Zen, Pure Land. They're all different Buddhist sects within the religion of Buddhism. So some of these sects can be so different in teachings. They're almost like different religions within the one religion. And that can make any religion pretty complicated, okay? And believe me, they are far more complex than what people think. And then over time, that sect can become more and more mainstream, and it becomes, in a sense, it functions like a church in a given society. So that Northern Europe is predominantly Protestant, and Protestantism is more the norm in a lot of Northern Europe, whereas Catholicism is more dominant in things like Spain and Italy, for example, where the Vatican is. So there, the Catholic Church is the dominant mainstream religion in Southern Europe, and the Protestant churches dominant in the North, for example. Okay, they become sort of the mainstream. Okay, then we have cult. Now, again, in sociological terms here, cults tend to be new religions in that these are groups that are more innovative. They really bring in new ideas, new practices. And in fact, they're so radically new and different, they're in a lot of tension with the established religion. So much tension with them that they get kicked out. They have to exist outside of the mainstream religion. Okay, so these can be movements, new movements that break away from existing religions through this kind of difference, or they could be movements that have been imported from another culture or society and are in tension with the mainstream religion. So for example, okay, as I mentioned earlier, in terms of Judaism being kind of the established religion back in Judea at the time of the Romans, and then the followers of Jesus starting to break away from aspects of Judaism that were just too radical, okay, too extreme. They basically got kicked out, were condemned as being heretical, that it then became eventually the new religion, first as a persecuted cult, so to speak, to eventually grow, and become dominant, become a new religion of Christianity. Right? Similarly with Buddhism, right? Breaking away from the various teachings at that time, which was, you could largely say, Hinduism. I mean, Hinduism also was evolving at that time. But the key thing is the Buddha rejected the authority of the Hindu priests and the Hindu scriptures. He found his own way to the truth, right? Through his own experience of enlightenment. And therefore, because of that difference in tension, it then became the new religion of Buddhism. So you'll have that is what happens in the history of religion. So it begins as a small group, as a breakaway kind of cult, but then as it grows and grows and grows and spreads and gets more established, it then becomes a mainstream religion on its own terms. Okay. Now, another example, though, here that's really important would be, for example, the Hare Krishnas. In India, within Hinduism, the Hare Krishnas in India would be categorized as a sect. It is a particular group that calls for very dedicated commitment to devotion to the god Krishna, with particular practices of chanting, the great mantra of the Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, right? To do that sort of chanting. And they have very specific practices around that with very strict commitment to that. And that is what sets it apart from mainstream Hinduism. In Hinduism, you have many deities, many gods, many goddesses, and people can do a variety of practices and have a variety of beliefs there. But here, the Hare Krishnas, they become a sect because it's very specific, focused, and committed, all right, to particular kind of practices and beliefs. And that's why it is a sect within Hinduism. However, when the Hare Krishnas came over to the West in 1965, right, with their leader, their guru, Swami Prabhupada, coming over in 1965, in our context in the West, it is a totally foreign religion, totally radically new and different ideas, that it was categorized as a cult in our context. Okay, so context makes a big difference here. It is, how does this religious group relate to the surrounding religion and society? If it's, still a part of that society and still a part of that religious tradition, it's a sect. But if it's too radical, new, different, and in tension with that society and with the mainstream religion, then it's categorized as a cult. Okay, so hopefully that makes some sense. Now, other key thing, and it was pretty obvious here, that originally then cults tend to be small in size because they kind of are split. They split off from existing religious traditions. They have a particular follower, particular teachings, and it starts to grow and grow and grow, right? And so sometimes it can be so successful, they will grow and become a full-fledged religion, as I already mentioned. Okay. Another thing too with cults, just to emphasize, they also tend to be more experiential in focus. Having a charismatic leader is a key factor in their getting established. Okay, and with that, that greater sense of commitment is involved here. Okay. So now that's kind of, the standard way of how the terminology is often used in religious studies. But now some other kind of usages of the term, because this is a key thing. The word can mean different things to different people, okay, in different contexts. Excuse me. And so on the one hand, the word cult can be used here, as you can see, in both anthropology and religious studies, and generally in academia as a whole, where it can usually refer to simply a very specific set of beliefs and practices revolving around an object of worship. And so this is where we have the root meaning of cult in Latin, cultus meaning worship. And so, for example, you can have it being used as the cult of Isis, Isis and Osiris, say, in terms of Egyptian religion, very specific beliefs and practices revolving the worship of these deities. Or of the cult of the Virgin Mary in the Catholicism, very specific beliefs and practices of devotion to the Virgin Mary in the Catholic Church. Or in ancient Israel, the temple cult of ancient Israel, specific religious practices, what the priests all did for rituals at the temple in ancient Israel, all right, in Jerusalem, for example. Then even it's been used in secular terms as, referring to just people's object of worship, like the cult of Lenin or the cult of the Beatles, for example. And I think it's a typo there, got to fix. And so you'll have it used in an even more secular kind of context where people are worshiping, like the cult of success, for example, whatever, things like that. Okay, so it's used in that regard. A second way that it's used, and often this is within religious traditions, you'll find various religious leaders making reference to certain groups as being cults, implying that they are heretical groups, that they are promoting false and distorted teachings of the faith. Okay, and so you would have, say, for example, in Christianity, Jehovah's Witnesses would be called a cult. All right, teaching heretical beliefs, heretical Christian beliefs that is held to be a distortion of Christianity, no longer being faithful to the essentials of Christianity. In Islam, for example, the Baha'i faith, the Baha'i was kicked out as being a heretical cult. It kind of grew out of Islam. It was presented as being a part of the Shia sect within Islam. However, the authorities rejected it and deemed it to be heretical, all right? And so it gets kicked out, and therefore it became then a new religion of the Baha'i faith. But in the Muslim context, in terms of traditional Islam, it's seen as heretical. It's a false teaching. Okay, so you'll find this sort of thing where within religions, people make references to various groups as being cults, implying that they teach falsehood. Okay, the distorted aspects of the faith. The third way it's used is, and this is something that became popular in the 70s, is a term that in popular usage that developed is referring to groups that use brainwashing and mind control techniques and that are highly manipulative, coercive, and dangerous. Okay, and this is something that began largely in the 1970s. There. And here we have, I wonder if I can move this so you can kind of see the picture here. This is Jim Jones and Jonestown. And here this, and again, I'm not going into any detail of these things, but just to give you an idea. In 1978, in November there in Guyana in Central America, Jim Jones was a leader of a group, a reverend, some kind of, I forget what kind of Christian denomination he was a part of or not or whatever, but came out of San Francisco, where he was very influential in San Francisco, did a lot of work within the Black community, and even won an award from the city of San Francisco at the time for his work in the Afro-American community, and had quite a large following and started to become a bit more paranoid about things and moved his community over to Guyana, as you can see here. And anyways, to make a long story short, became more and more paranoid about, there were various accusations being made against him. And so it led to his having all of them commit to drinking this poison Kool-Aid, and those who refused were then shot or killed. And over 900 people were put to death, ended up dying. And this was quite a shocking, devastating event. And that is one huge thing that triggered this idea that some of these groups can be very dangerous, leading to mass suicide like this. Another not quite as drastic of an example is Heaven's Gate cult, and headed by here Marshall Applewhite. And he was actually dying of cancer. He had terminal cancer, and he kind of integrated some teachings from the Bible with extraterrestrials and UFOs and things. And then with the comet Hale-Bopp was going through, he was teaching that it's coming to the earth, and I forget now why, but people were going to be taken aboard onto these spaceships, and taken off into who knows where in the universe. And in order to get on the ship, that you'd have to commit suicide. And so, and the men were castrated before this, and 39 were, I forget now if they drank something or what they did to kill themselves. I forget now what, but this happened there, as you can see, in 1997. Okay. And that was another pretty dramatic event. And then another one here is the Order of the Solar Temple. I'm just kind of highlighting just a few here that are the most noteworthy because of the number of people that were killed, okay? Because normally this doesn't really happen that much. But these were the biggies. And this is a group that developed in the 90s, mind you, had earlier history, and kind of tried to revive ideas from the Knights Templar, and blended it with various occult ideas and some New Age ideas, and also some extraterrestrial ideas, and quite a blend of things. And Luc Jouret was one of the key figures, and they had members in France, Switzerland, Quebec were sort of the three main areas. And in all three areas, over a period of years, a number of people engaged in some form of suicide. And it's terrible, some things that happened. There was a baby they believed that was the birth of the Antichrist that they killed. And anyways, it's terrible. And they even burnt down the buildings of some of them where they killed themselves. And yeah, terrible things that happened here. But here was another case of he had terminal cancer. So for some of these leaders, it's like they knew they were going to die, and they're going to take some people with them, with, I don't know, their beliefs. So there's a whole bunch of stuff around this. So that's just to give you a bit of an idea. Oh, I thought I had one more slide here. Didn't I have another slide here? Okay. Oh, did I already say this? Yeah, no. Oh, I think I skipped this slide. Yeah. And so this is where, because of some of these events, but not even just because of them, even before these events, we have the 1970s, it kicked off what's known often as the anti-cult movement. The 1960s was a period of intense social change, and we'll be looking at this more in my class, which included an explosion of people wanting to explore alternative spiritualities, okay? And with that, all kinds of new religious groups got going. All kinds of gurus started coming over from India and elsewhere. In 1965, there was a change in the immigration policy that kind of opened the door to that. And the hippies of the 60s were really just thirsty for spirituality and getting into yoga and meditation and doing all these things, and LSD and altered states of consciousness, and just wanting to explore, these other dimensions of reality. So there was just an explosion of things going on. And also, as I mentioned, the Hare Krishna movement gets going here as well. And so what happens here is, you've got, mainstream America, if you think of the 1950s, pretty status quo conventional society. And all of a sudden, the kids going to university or college or what have you, and all of a sudden they're starting to get into all kinds of weird things. And the parents are freaking out. Some of them shave their heads and they become vegetarians. And they start chanting Hare Krishna on the street, wearing an orange robe. And for parents, like back then, it's like, what on earth is going on here? It just totally freaked a lot of people out. Like, what has happened to my kid? Going to university, and he comes home with a shaved head, and he's chanting Hare Krishna all the time, and he's now vegetarian and believes in reincarnation and talking about karma. This was all new stuff for people, totally foreign to people, right? And so in their minds, they thought, my kid must have been brainwashed. Nobody in their ordinary state of mind would come up with this stuff. And so we get quite the intense reaction against what's going on here, right? And so there was this conviction that people were being brainwashed in a lot of these groups and things. And so there were even attempts, and people claiming to be experts at deprogramming. They would kidnap some of these people, the kids, and try to deprogram them, and get rid of this brainwashing. And so you had these sorts of things going on. And there were then attempts in the early 80s for legislation to be passed to criminalize conversion, that for you to convert to any kind of religious group, that should be, a criminal offense, and it should be illegal to try to convert anybody to anything religious. And there was a real movement towards that, but it, didn't get passed because it was, again, against the freedom of religion. And then, of course, Jim Jones and Jonestown event there, that massive, the terrible massacre of 900 people just fueled the flames here. So this kind of really is what kicked off this idea that a cult, quote, what that word referred to were these dangerous brainwashing religious groups that are out to deceive and exploit its members. And this is how that term got popularized, especially in the media. So for a lot of people, when they use the word cult, this is what they automatically think of, are these groups that are very manipulative, deceptive, coercive, and whatnot. Okay, that's where this term comes from. So here you've got a bit of an overview of the different ways the word cult is used in different contexts by different people, some of the background to some of these ideas, and also just a little bit of an idea as to how religion evolves. All right. Okay, so hopefully this is of value. And there you go. That's all I'm going to say here. Okay, now let me end recording. Ciao.